you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's just a great honor to be with you today. Thank you for inviting me to address this body. I'm honored to participate in this program, to once again stand with each of you and the Iranian people in their quest for a secular, democratic, and non-nuclear Republic of Iran. The quest for fundamental human rights for the Iranian people and the quest to hold the Iranian regime accountable for human rights abuses and their support for terrorism. I noted in my remarks at the global conference that the conference was coming at an important time as democracy around the world is under tremendous stress, while authoritarian powers and autocracies are on the rise. Likewise, this conference today is also coming at an important time, a time when the United Nations is once again assembling in New York, and Iran's new leader is set to address the General Assembly, albeit virtually rather than in person. Thank goodness he's not coming to the United States. The timing of this conference is important because it demonstrates the continued drumbeat for freedom and justice and democracy that is the hallmark of this organization. You are continuing the drumbeat directed to the United Nations that the rise of Iran as a purported world power is somewhat illusory. It is clear that those in power in Iran are not there because of the support of the Iranian people, but because they continue to represent and repress dissent and manipulate the levers of government. Such manipulation was on full display this past year with the so-called election of Raisi as Iran's president. With this conference, you are continuing the drumbeat for the UN and the world to know that by allowing Raisi to speak on a world stage, the United Nations is turning a blind eye to over 3 decades of mounting evidence regarding Raisi's rise to power through repression and injustice and his role in the execution of literally thousands of political dissidents dating back to the 1988 massacre. I've read recently that Raisi's remarks to the United Nations will focus on laudable themes of justice, freedom, and ending corruption. But we all know actions speak louder than words. Justice and freedom have certainly not been the experience of the Iranian citizens at the hands of a corrupt, brutal theocracy whose economic incompetence has plundered the country's wealth, pushing 80% of the population into poverty. The regime has continued to repress the Iranian people through imprisonment and execution. Those are not the themes of justice and freedom. With Raisi's appointments and legislative confirmations at the highest levels of government, many whose terrorist credentials match those of Raisi himself, there is nothing to suggest that this man will be a leader for change in Iran. Many in his cabinet are, like Raisi himself, under sanctions by the United States and the European Union. One has even been criminally charged and has an outstanding Interpol warrant for his role in a 1994 bombing in Buenos Aires that killed 85 people. Frankly, although he is president of Iran, in my view, the United Nations should be leading the calls for Raisi's prosecution, or at a minimum, calls for an independent inquiry into the allegations of state-ordered executions of literally thousands of political prisoners in 1988 and beyond, and the role that Raisi may have played in those executions, rather than giving him a global forum to carry on a charade of legitimacy. You know, calls for an independent inquiry have been growing each year, from United Nations experts to Amnesty International. Just this past summer, on the eve of Raisi's predetermined election, and reports that mass graves were being destroyed as part of a cover-up concerning the 1988 executions, the UN investigator on human rights called for an independent inquiry, noting that over the years his office has gathered testimonies and evidence that he is ready to turn over to the United Nations, Human Rights Council, or other impartial investigation. The drumbeat for justice, for accountability, grows stronger and louder each day. So in my view, rather than allowing Raisi to speak tomorrow, perhaps they should instead just allow him to zoom in on a big screen like the one behind me, and instead of allowing him to speak, announce to the world that the UN is going to begin that investigation and that they're going to demand that the government of Iran give their full cooperation to bring these people to justice. Ladies and gentlemen, you know accountability is the first and perhaps the most important step toward democracy in Iran. And we hear that drumbeat from across the globe, particularly in Albania. It's clear, crystal clear, that Tehran considers Ashraf III as the beacon of hope for change in Iran. It was Iranian operatives who were detained on charges of terrorism by Albanian authorities following a foiled terrorist plot against the MEK in March 2018. The regime's ambassador, who was a senior Ministry of Intelligence and Security, was expelled along with 3 other so-called diplomats because of the significant leadership role of 1,000 women in Ashraf III and their inspirations for women in Iran, as well as hundreds of witnesses to Iran's regime's crimes who are now there. Tehran remains focused on physical elimination of Ashraf III residents while demonizing them with misinformation and propaganda. Here today, we will not let that prevail. Here today, we will continue that drumbeat for truth, for justice. And I should note, parenthetically, that in light of recent events in the Middle East, that it should also be commended that the women of Ashraf III are no longer just inspirations to the women in Iran, but are now the inspirations and hope for women across the Middle East, particularly in Afghanistan. But as I have said before, change will not and should not come to Iran because other countries like the United States want it or even demand it. Change must come, and I believe will come, from you and the Iranian people. By continuing the drumbeat for freedom and democracy, you and those in Ashraf III are the source and instrument of change. You are the inspiration of change. There is that blueprint for change and an alternative to theocracy that's out there. Ms. Rajavi has introduced her 10-point plan for the future of Iran, which calls for the universal right to vote, free elections, and a market economy. Her plan advocates for separation of church and state, gender, religious, and ethnic equality, and a foreign policy based on peaceful coexistence and a non-nuclear Iran. The people of Iran are demonstrating time and time again, year after year, that they are willing to make the sacrifices for freedom. But change, true change, lasting change, does not come quickly or easily. True change, lasting change will come only through continued determination, ongoing commitment, and lasting sacrifice, characteristics possessed by all freedom-loving Iranians. Never lose sight of the quest for freedom. Never lose hope. Continue that drumbeat for a free Iran, knowing that each of you, each and every one of you, and everyone in Ashraf III and around the world are Iran's drum majors for justice. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be with you today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.